Good morning. Today is the 3rd of October, 2022. When they had the economic upheaval in the United States in the 1970s, it was common for the people who were doing that to go into debt as much as they could. When it came to the national debt, this is what they said. They could raise the debt ceiling limit as much as they wanted to because all they had to do was concern themselves with the interest on that debt. And since the economics of the United States was so large and the interest so small, they could theoretically continue that debt on forever. There is something wrong with that, of course, and one of the things that's wrong with it is that they threw out reasoning itself. The very definition of economics is a moral discipline that concerns itself with the allocation of limited resources. And so you find yourself wondering how in the world you reverse engineer all this just to get to the point where you can talk about it. We shall try. Poverty leads to piety, piety leads to prosperity, and prosperity leads to a decision between, well, pigging out or getting onto a maintenance level. And in the 1970s, they chose the former. They threw out God. They threw out associating those thoughts in your mind that have to do with romance with having to do with getting the gal pregnant. They threw out the idea of making money by making people better off. They became the consumption society. They became professional recreators. There was an explosion of professional athletics, for example. There was the Darwin alpha male architect that would build a house and then rent it out to you rather than putting you in your own house. There was the front office feminist and the 3-martini lunch, and they became the consumption society. So we'll put a circle in the air, and inside it we shall put Harry the Hippie and Al the Afro and Fancy the Feminist, and we shall put in there the people who are pure consumers. Beneath that we'll draw another circle, and we'll start talking about the people who produce things. Among them are the factory workers, and in the United States they put those factories overseas. Japan and China are two examples of that. When I was going to school at the time, one of the economic professors was saying that there was an economic discipline that said you would go to Japan, you would give them a dollar bill, a piece of paper, and they would give you a stereo, and you would in effect own that stereo. He was smiling when he said that, but that's exactly what they did, and that's exactly how they did it. It works terrific for about a generation. In China, they opened up the markets and started selling things from China to the rest of the world. And in China, they had a hellacious society. They had a communist society. They literally made everybody all wear the same clothes. They put, I don't know about the children, but they put the men and women into the factories, and they simply worked them till they burnt out. They were they were producers in their purest form. And the people who were in charge of it, people like Chairman Mao, were consumers in their purest form, the communism. And so we'll go back to our circle, and inside the top circle we'll put in it Harry the Hippie and Al the Afro, and now people like Chairman Mao. And beneath that, in the other circle, we shall put the people who work in factories in places like Japan and China. Beneath that, let's put a third circle, and in that circle we'll realize that we'll put in it the people in the United States who lost their jobs and became homeless because all the factories moved overseas. An example of that was the steel industry. Evidently, the United States had an absolutely terrific steel industry that was the envy of the world, but France, who actually didn't, took taxpayers' money and subsidized the steel, and they could sell it so cheaply they literally put the steel industry in the United States out of business. And so people in the northeastern part of the country, for example, were left homeless, and the places turned into slums and poverty. And so there's an example of those three circles. There's the example of people that are pure consumers, Harry the Hippie and the people in China and the people who are running France. And next there were people who were pure producers, such as the people in China that were working in the factories. And then beneath that were people who were left homeless because they lost the jobs in the factories. We can continue this on much further, but let's stop so we can make the point for this anecdote. We shall have a sense of categories now, and we'll use one of our old anecdotes and come up with our fancy graph. We'll put the priest on one side and the pimp on the other. And there's a priest on one side, and then there's a line into the middle, and then there's a flip-flop, and then there's a line out to the right side, and there's a pimp on the other side. And the side of the priest represents God and country. The 1950s American man and woman who were first well-adjusted, even though that's not a natural thing. Then they were good wives and husbands, and good fathers and mothers, and then good citizens. And they were completely thrown out of society. The American housewife literally became the welfare mother, the gal who would go back and ask the 10-year-old what he wanted for his birthday was literally thrown into poverty. And the children were thrown into poverty. There's an entire generation who have no fathers and who don't know how to read or write. From the point of view of the American Yank, he had no ability to support a wife and kids. On the other side, on the side of the pimp, was the stereotypical peasant and property class society, where the people who are in the upper class have no sense of love and no sense of guilt in them. They live the highest standard of living you could possibly have in this world, but they also cause poverty and despair and agony and, in the political, tyranny. And so there we have it. Oh, excuse me. They could have gone the other way. An example of going the other way would have looked something like this. The United States, when China first when they allowed China to start selling products overseas, the United States could have laid down the law and said something like this. First, you'll use the American dollar, and then you'll let everybody in China wear clothes that fit, then wear clothes that fit with a style. And then if you're going to hire somebody, you're going to have to pay the man enough money to support himself, a wife, and 2.2 children. And you're going to get the women out of the factories. That young gal should be at the shopping mall learning Chinese Valley Girl talk. They have their own world and their own set of priorities. And that's what you do. Before we end this anecdote, though, let's have one more observation, and that is that even though it's the United States, they couldn't reason a judicial court. All the philosophy and all the things they say are true. You can't reason a judicial court. We're back to our example of God and country, where in our example we went to the Supreme Court and we insisted they adopt the Apostles' Creed. Why? Because we say so, that's why. And once they do that, then they have a judicial court and natural law, and an American Yank will appear, and all the things that made the United States such a magical place to live. Well, that's it for now. A set of categories. We shall see you on the other anecdotes.